Hey, Ran, how you doing?
So good to see you. I'm waiting for a copy of your new book on Mingus or Roach or Abby Lincoln or
I'd have to write it. Although, it's interesting. I got swept into this Earl Garner jazz project
oh
and have been working. It's through Jerry Allen. Before Jerry Allen passed, he kind of
she
pulled me
was
into it. Yeah, amazing. So I just finished a whole long essay for a catalog of all of his octave recordings. And I was thinking about you because the idea of ear training, of trusting the ear. I mean, he was a master at that and proved it over and over again, the importance of being able to hear. um, so I thought about that with him, but I don't think I'll never get to the point where I could write a book about him. So let me just begin. And genius is one of the most overused adjectives and nouns, actually, in the English language. And few people on this earth really live up to the moniker of genius, um, which is defined as a person who is exceptionally intelligent or creative, either generally or in some particular respect. And that is Ram Blake. In fact, that's even too small a definition because we're talking to one of the most original pianists of the 20th and 21st century, just in terms of approach. Uh, One of the most amazing composers, teachers, scholars, and scholars not just of music, but of film, literature, art, history, and someone who's astutely aware of politics. And let me just say how I came to know Rand. Of course, anyone who loves his music cannot avoid finding his music. So as a younger person, I heard Epistrophe, You Stepped Out of a Cloud, Horse is Blue, The Short Life of Barbara Monk, which was one of the inspirations for me for the book that I ended up writing, and certainly read Rand's interview with him in Cadence. And one of my favorite recordings of all of his is Improvisations with Jackie Byard, where they take apart T for two in a way that I think no one's ever done. And Sonata for Two Pianos is just, something I listen to all the time. Anyway, so in 2005, I wrote Ran because I began working on this book on Thelonious Monk. And as we'll talk about, he had a relationship with Monk, a very important one. And also not just a relationship, but one of the most insightful analyses of Monk's music and his approach as composer and pianist. And so I wanted to interview him. He was very happy to do it, which was nice because most people would like hesitate. And we met first in New York, and then I went to his home in Brookline,
right.
and we hung out and had just a fantastic conversation. The only thing I regretted was that there were about 10,000 questions I wanted to ask that had nothing to do with Monk. And so this is the opportunity right now to begin to ask some of those questions. So Rand, it's great to see you again. You look fantastic.
And it's wonderful seeing you, Robin.
So I can't wait to get into this. And I want to begin from the beginning, and forgive my bizarre way of asking these questions. But so you were born in Springfield, Mass, grew up in Suffield, which is right across the border. And I know, that growing up in this community, you listen to a lot of music, and I thought about your Suffield Gothic CD with Houston Person,
Oh,
and just the way that you both connect. I mean, he's such a soulful, funky player.
oh, he's the best.
Yeah,
Oh,
and then you have these beautiful unaccompanied pieces. I wrote a note to myself, listening, thinking to myself,
fantastic.
you gave the whole history of piano in jazz, blues, and gospel in 45 minutes. So I always wondered if that particular CD had anything to do with the music you listened to growing up. So can you talk about your,
Yes, I met Houston Pearson when I was 15 years old, and he was 19, but he could have been 30. He was so sophisticated. I remember he dated a young woman, Fern, and I met him at the Elks Club in North Hartford in the mid 50s. And I just was hit by his beautiful, beautiful playing. And wish I'd even written more about him in my book because he was uh, so important. Even though it was several weeks I heard him, but we probably only spoke 4 or 5 times. I just sat in the audience, and to suddenly have him be in my life again was amazing. And some of Suffield Gothic is of the past. I think of Mahalia. Uh, there was a recent visit to Tate County, Mississippi, and I thank David Evans so much for arranging for me to meet Napoleon Strickland, wonderful artist, and and making the album just brought floods of memory, and it was so wonderful to be with Houston.
can you talk about some of those memories as a teenager coming up? Um, I mean, clearly you had a connection to gospel music and to Bartok and to jazz. Who did you listen to, and who influenced you, and what were you doing?
I think I didn't hear bebop, and one of my introductions to jazz was Thelonious, of course, and then I really disliked 92% of Stan Kenton's recordings, but there were 3 or 4 good ones like progressive jazz and innovations of modern music, which were not subtle. They didn't have Duke Ellington, Charles Ives, but they were monumental. And then gospel, I think of Eunice Clover, all the local people, Hubert Powell, who was a minister at the Church of God in Christ in North Hartford. And I attended a lot of those services. Of course, the Spirit moved me when I was there. I couldn't, to join the church, I would have to give up gambling, liquor, and movies, and I couldn't give up films. Uh, then, of course, Scythian a Suite by Sergei Prokofiev was very important. And then a little bit later, hearing blues singers Robert Pete Williams, the Angola Penitentiary, that was more later 50s. Uh, and I loved the Prestige Bluesville recordings and heard them, Monk, uh, Bartok music for string instruments, the second movement of Charles Ives' Fourth Symphony, and the list goes on and on. And then I I really had a few good years in Springfield. I moved away really almost at the end of junior high, and I went to a Marvel school. I guess I got well liked because I never was before. I was voted as vice president of the class, and then I moved to Suffield, and that was a different story. Uh, People were different. There wasn't diversity. I'll leave it at that. And I haven't really in. I really haven't heard that album recently, so you might remind me. I know there's the duet with Houston, there's the Mahalia, there's the title track, Curtis. Well, that's the first track, which David Baker, not the trombonist, cellist, but another one, we did it over and over again, thinking that it might be some kind of a semi-small hit. Uh, wishful thinking on our part. And just the whole thing of being reunited with Houston. And the Bonadrini family in Italy were so tremendous. And they were wonderful when I met them with Jackie Bard. And I did the Duke Ellington album. And it was a wonderful, Giovanni Bonadrini was miraculous to work with. I think many of my albums do deal with the past.
Yeah, well, we'll get to those in a second. In fact, before we get there, just a couple other questions. So you studied with Bill Russo and Ray Casarino in Suffield, right?
Yes, I would go to East Hartford for Ray, and there were childhood teachers, but Ray was marvelous. He himself identified himself as a jazz cocktail pianist. That's his own description. And Bill Russo was very important. I was a correspondent. I really didn't get to meet people I became a student at Lenox. And of course, there were people that I never met, but I felt some of Gunther Schuler's music, Monk's music, Mingus's music. They were teachers, but I hadn't met them yet.
Let me ask you about the cinema, because clearly, I mean, the story that you tell often is about the impact that seeing Spiral Staircase had on you at age 12. But then, listening to some of your other music, I thought about, you listening to Fritz Lang, watching Fritz Lang's Dr. Mabuse, The Gambler.
Oh,
And I'm just wondering, like, there's film noir, there's silent film. How do you assess the impact the cinema had on you and your music?
and silent film didn't get important to me till way later than the Spiral Staircase, which, if any of you see it, it's got 3 terrible soap opera scenes. I don't. It's so hard to imagine. I began going to so many theaters in Springfield that the box office people knew me, the ushers knew me. In those ages, you were kicked out at 6 o'clock unless you were with an adult. I just got fascinated, intrigued, and it wasn't really 100% horror, and it wasn't just a group of, policemen chasing criminals or criminals chasing the police. There was things that were not revealed. They were behind the Venetian blinds. And some of the music was not subtle. Some of it was wonderful, like Alex North's Streetcar Named Desire. That's 1950. And I began just hearing these and creeping down to play the piano at midnight, making sure that the soft pedal was on. My parents used to like my music in the 40s, but they felt I was going down a bad path.
Well, say more about that. I'm just curious.
Well, they didn't like. I don't know if I was, but I did. Where if I imitated Grieg piano concerto, or they like somewhat in an upper room, which now I've forgotten, but sometimes I feel like a motherless child went over. But after seeing Spiral Staircase, they still would parade me out for a guest or two. but I would see them shaking their heads, which is okay. You can't be uh, praised too much or you get spoiled.
Yeah, I know. I'd say that to my wife all the time about my daughter. I'm like, nope. I said that she's doing Suzuki violin. I'm like, you could do better. So let me ask. I mean, I'm really obsessed with this question now. I hadn't thought about this, but in terms of you going to the Church of God in Christ and listening to the music, did you bring that music home in memory and hearing? In other words, I'm thinking about what it means to be trained as a pianist, to basically play a score, and then also have another experience in the world where you're taking the music.
Yeah. Well, whether, and of course, if I'm successful or not, somebody like you or Art Lang or uh, Gunther, I mean, there were people saying that I did it or that I didn't. Of course, a lot of these scores were not on records. Alex North wasn't. And when we go back to Spiral, some of it's rather nonsense and sentimental. But I wasn't a great reader of music, and I would just go back when I could to films, or there might have been a few CDs, like Leith Stevens brought one out for Marlon Brando's music, The Wild One, and there were others. I would go and see if I could do it correctly. And then often that night I would dream of motorcycles or a dark house or Gene Tierney being hypnotized in Whirlpool, and later on Abby Lincoln, Nothing But a Man. Uh, so a lot of my dreams were on films as well as life, and I've recently tried to see if I can program dreams and decide what I want to dream about. And I've done that about 60 times that I've tried, and I've been successful about 4 times. So it's very hard to do. Do you want to get away from COVID, racism, uh, the climate change? And so I said, can I go to the world of Agatha Christie, where the murder is right in the house? And it worked for about 20 minutes once, and then it got right back to realistic stuff. But I guess I'm not sure I knew how to do that. And Gunther and a later friend, Heike Snetsky, who, by the way, was a terribly great fan of Jerry Allen and somebody you should talk with, they seemed to know what I would do. And sometimes I would not repeat things exactly. So for somebody memorizing a Chopin Polonaise, even an easy prelude, and you can add a little bit of expression or dynamics from another person, but it's so precise and hidden. That would be torture for me. I would have to hear the pianists that I've chosen again and again, look at the score, go back, and without any liberties, torture.
Amazing.
But it really is, I dreamed and lived a lot of this. And when school got dull, I daydreamed in class. And
Okay.
I don't blame my teachers at all for being annoyed.
Well, speaking of school, so you arrive at Bard College. It's 56, is that right?
Right. Gene Lee came at 57. Yeah.
Mhm. Well, let's talk about Bard College. So your memories.
Well, I had a wonderful composition organ teacher, Claire Leonard. He was very gifted. He spoke about Nade Boulanger, who he loved. And of course, we know Quincy Jones. So many people. Leonard Bernstein went to her. And I had Kate Wolf from the Berlin Philharmonic. She and Madame Margaret Chaloff and Sophia uh, I've had some wonderful teachers that were not from the jazz tradition. They talked about touch. And at Bard College, I had John Simon, who could be I don't know if you read his film criticism, he can be terribly cynical. I had Ralph Ellison, and I had Bill Humphrey, and then this wonderful German person, Kate Wolf. So I had a full load of wonderful people. It was very exciting, but rather than staying on campus for weekends, it was either New York City or back to Suffield so I could go back to the Church of God in Christ. But I did make friends, and particularly Jean Lee, another one, Carol Mosher, and Henri de Sing from Paris, who remained a friend for life. So, and then there were just incredible faculty. Hannah Arendt spoke during my freshman year. She was just a visitor. And we heard Susan Sontag. And I don't think we heard, I know later I audited a course at Columbia with Leroy Jones on playwriting and theater, and I can find no records of it. I wouldn't expect to find my name because I was an auditor. But back to Bard College, it was so enriching. And of course, the most exciting part was Jean Lee.
Right, right. Before we talk about Jean Lee, because I'd love to hear the details of that. So Ralph Ellison was your teacher?
Yes, in a class, not a. I did study for a while with Martin Williams in New York City. I think it's so important to study on history and criticism with a private teacher. But Ralph Ellison, he did have a few English majors as students. I was not a private student. In fact, I had gotten through the first half of Invisible Man. It's a tough novel to read in many ways, both emotionally, but there's a lot to pack in your head for the plot. But he was quite wonderful. I got a little bit of criticism, which I deserved. And he, though, gave me a letter or an introduction to Nika de Koningswater Rothschild. But he was, there were people that were bigger disciples of Ralph. If he was going to pick 5 or 6 of the memorable students, I would have been, subscript. But he was so alive. He was so alive, and there were wonderful artists, and it was very, very exciting time, and there were many writers, composers. So as I got to my junior and senior year, I stayed there a lot more. And really very exciting. Barrytown, Red Hook, the whole community, and really a small campus getting to know people.
So take us back to 1957. You meet Jean Lee. You meet her in a class on campus. How did you?
She came into a building which now has been, it's still on the campus, but they're fancy concert halls. But this was the miniature concert hall, and I was playing piano. She said, "You sound like Art Tatum." And I said, I don't deserve, maybe I would have liked to be called Thelonious, but Art, he had amazing, besides his velocity, he had the rapport he had with Ben Webster, and I said, I don't think so, but thank you. And then we began to talk more, and we started hanging out and started recording. Later in my last year, she and I did things for Bard College Festival. In her second year, my third year, we grew apart, not for any real reason, but she was meeting many other people, and I was enjoying my 6-week field period with Atlantic Records, so that we just were on different routes. and journeys. But I look upon this as a very important growing period.
Right. So, but you did get back together in the sense that,
Our senior year.
right. So November, because November 1961 is when you made the recording with Gene, the duo recording on The Newest Sound.
I would have guessed 1 year later, but you may be right. I'm very bad with years, but I
It
think
came out. It came out in '62, but it was recorded.
I think you're right. So boy, then Jean must have come down from Bard College because she didn't graduate to 1961, and we performed for Gunther Schuller and a guy that managed us a little bit, Guy Friedman and Dan Karlinski. And then Gunther wrote to George Avakian, and there's a lot more background, but I don't know if I'm privy to it. I know there were letters back and forth, and I think Martin Williams showed me a couple of years later, but it happened, and we started work on a second album. And although our music did well in Italy, France, Sweden, not astonishingly well, not really up there on the top, but it did not badly. But we really flunked any kind of test in the United States. And I know Victor had a great publicity man, Elliot Horn, and they had Gustl Breuer, who tried to promote the record, and it just fell through the cracks.
Right. Well, it's interesting because that record, all the the whole series of The Newest Sound, and then the live recordings, they're classics today. I mean, when everyone thinks of like the ideal duo, piano vocal duo, um, what you and Gene did is considered like the best. I mean, everyone turns to that record. So maybe it was just ahead of its time.
Well, and we also spent years Sunday morning in my apartment on 113th Street. The first few years, I had a landlady, Amelia Lehrfeld, and did she love Gene as a person and as a singer? And we did one charity number. I think we did Mal Waldron's Left Alone at the Jazz Gallery to raise money. We only just did one number. They got some real stars in it, but our thing was that we really had the chance to practice, and once in a while either of us might goof and skip a week. But even 35 weeks out of 52, 2 or 3 hours, we really got to share time. And I don't think that's happening much these days.
Right. Exactly. It doesn't. Well, it's clear that you spent a lot of time together because just musically, you're so connected. And I love those recordings. And one thing I wanted to ask you about was, so you made this recording November 15th and 16th, 1961, which suggests that Jean probably graduated in the spring, which means that she may not have been in school. But also, it was the same year that Abby Lincoln recorded. And I think you were at that session where she sang.
Yes. And Monk was he came, they had a big hug. And that's where I met Mate Edie, who later recorded me Blue Potato against Orrin Keepner's Senior Advice. And but and of course I loved an album they made a year or two earlier, Freedom Now Suite. And then of course I would check out Abby's work on Riverside's Laugh Clown Laugh. And I know the lyrics. Joe is pretty sick. She did that often as encores. The title I can't think of this minute. But back to Gina, the recording, George Avaki and Gunther spent a lot of time hearing it. And then a former student, Eli Kessler, discovered that Belgium had a lot of unreleased concert tapes, and I can't tell you how many hours and weeks Aaron Hartley worked on bringing this record and doing all the sequencing. And I think he wanted to have one or two things that may not have been perfect, just a whole representation of where we were in 1966 and 67. So I really thank Aaron and Elis Gistelink for this chance to perform with Gene and have it documented.
Yeah. Oh, I thank Aaron too.
Yeah.
That was so great. So before we move on, I didn't want to leave this moment of 61 because one of the things I thought was really striking was that so Abby records Left Alone and Blue Monk at that session in
Yeah.
February 61. And then those are two of the tunes that are also you and Gene do. Did Abby's performance influence just the repertoire what you and Gene were doing? Did you ever talk about her?
Abby and I spoke about Gene, but I don't think. I think Abby, it was years later she heard me. She was at Gene Lee's memorial. I don't think she had really. I didn't make it available. I was so in awe of her and Max, and was thrilled that later in the 90s they became sort of friends again. And Gene loved Billie Holiday, also got very interested in Chris Connor, but Abby really was her model. She really cherished Abby so much. And so it was great getting to know Abby would appear every Thanksgiving, every Valentine's weekend in Scholars in Boston. And of course, maybe I'm jumping ahead, being a waiter in a New York club was great for me to get to know people.
Right. Well, actually, this is a perfect segue to my next question. I'm going to connect two things. So while you're at Bard, I know you worked out some amazing, uh, an amazing kind of pedagogical experience. This, study with Oscar Peterson, with Mary Lou Williams, I think Mal Waldron, and certainly Thelonious Monk. And then when you were in New York, you were a real working musician in that you waited tables at the Jazz Gallery and you work at Atlantic Records.
Yeah.
Which
And then
I guess
yeah.
So could you talk about that period and what working out all those different relationships?
Well, I must say that some of the people I worked with I saw only a few times. I was I often felt I wish I had given some more. I really feel Mary Lou and Oscar Peterson. I would have loved to have given some endowment to Mary Lou Williams. Oscar Peterson was the most fantastic teacher. I met him the first year at Lenox. That would have been summer 57. And 2 years later, or a year and a half later, he came to Atlantic Records during my field period, and he gave me 3 or 4 lessons. He could imitate me. He didn't use a lot of the velocity and speed, the continuity, his impressionism. He was remarkable. And he invited me to come to Canada, I think to Ontario, Toronto area, and my parents wanted me to finish Bard College. I could see that point. And then I don't think I would have loved to have gone and paid for my study and really probably do some things I might not have enjoyed, as well as work on the creative aspect with Oscar. But his tours got more and more well known, and he was already famous, but his career even blossomed up for the next 20 years. And working at Jazz Gallery, I really started getting to know Mal then, and would go to Queens, St. Albans, taking 2 subways and a bus trip, uh, and being with Elaine, his young daughter Mala, and a stepson who was called Junior, who he adored his stepdad. And uh, of all pieces we worked on with a song in my heart, but I remember what I really gravitated to was Straight Ahead. And then he gave me things on how to relax. And of course, he and Gunther both stressed keeping a central line, maybe not an organized jazz line, it might, but just not getting diverse for the sake of diversity. And I know Gunther Schuller, at that time, I never thought of recording myself, and he had some type of a primitive recorder. And when we heard music back like A Piece of Mind, Silver Fox, he would say, well, Ran, aren't you being rather long-winded here? And I know later he said Coltrane could get away with it because of his monumental spirit and rhythm, but none of us are like Coltrane. And of course, my mind flies meeting Coltrane in Gunther's apartment and what Coltrane said about Gunther. But back to my first year in New York, I loved the waiting job, and these few years were the happiest of my life. So meeting Wes Montgomery, Monk Montgomery, seeing Dave Brubeck again, Eola, uh, uh, Lionel Hampton came in. I don't think he played there. Gil Evans, who I really didn't get to know. Nika, who always sat in one part of the club hating ice cubes. Uh, don't do this again. She never used her finger, and believe me, I never did it. And the people that would come in, and maybe in my self-absorbed world, I thought they were coming to say hello to me, but of course, I knew that was nonsense. They came, they listened. A lot of the crowds came for the 11:30, 12 o'clock show. So as a waiter, we didn't get out of the club to 3:30 or 4. And the only thing we really were handicapped by was smoke fumes. There were a lot of smokers then. And then I would take a crosstown subway to the west side or walk it and get on the IRT to 116th Street and walk home. But what a time. And Marvin Potashnik, I wonder if his name is ever, he hired me, and I know Joe Termini said, Ren, you came just in time during my vacation. I never would have hired you because you like music too much. But I was in there, and then they were pleased to say goodbye to me that May. But from September to May, I was there, thrilled to be there, and carrying all these memories in my head.
Wow. How did you get involved with Atlantic Records?
Well, that was in Bard College. I wish I could have worked there. Each year, Bard and Antioch and now Northeastern, they give students 6 weeks to do a project. So my first year, too, I worked in a record store. My last year, I worked on my senior recital and also really studying Porgy and Bess. But my junior year, so that would have been the spring 1950, from January to February, I worked in Nestle Erdogan's office and assisting Tom Dowd, the engineer, who, of course, he and Arif Martin, what they did with Aretha, Wilson Pickett, Chris Connor, Modern Jazz Quartet, so many uh, remarkable, of course, Coltrane, Ray Charles before he went to ABC. It was the label. Ray had just left during my 6-week sojourn, and Chris Connor was out of town. I had both hoped to get to know them a little bit, but I remember Ray coming by to pick up a check or something, but I didn't want to go and say, "Hi, Mr. Charles, I love you," greenback dollar bills. But just to be there, see the musicians at work, Laverne Baker giving her a drink. She said, "I wanted a drink, not this water stuff." She was doing a session for Dinah Washington. And then Abby Lincoln, when I gave her water when she was choking, she said, "I don't drink on stage." And then later apologized because it was not brandy. You never can be right. Those women knew how to curse. But naive Rand Blake deserved it. But it was so remarkable just seeing people coming and going. And Dizzy Gillespie was a riot, a stand-up comedian, and he took me for lunch with at a place near the Musicians Union. I said, "I want a beer." He said, "I guess you can, but I'm behind now." And one time I saw him on 57th Street with this miniature dog actually conducting traffic as if he was a policeman. I only saw that once. He would sometimes go like this to me. He didn't remember name, but he said, "You there" or something. But to see all these legends from Suffield, Connecticut, I came Springfield. I just felt it was cinema. I was speechless, Robin. I was speechless.
It is amazing. I mean, it was an amazing time too.
Oh yeah, and I wish students could get to know people 10 or 15 years older. It's hard to believe Thelonious was in the phone book. And I remember I only met her a couple of Diane Dorinek, who did liner notes for Mingus's Columbia recordings. Everybody was on telephone book. Maybe there'll be one for cell phones. But it was a very rich time for me to learn New York, to know the suburbs, to take part-time jobs there in an engineering office, to dream a little bit, to just walk through the streets of all parts of New York, from Sugar Hill to Greenwich Village to the Columbia University period. So rich. And there was Sweet Daddy Grace's, which I noticed that's no longer there. I noticed that when going down for Abby Lincoln's memorial. So there are things. Duke Ellington's wife, who married a nice Greek gentleman, lived, I believe, on Riverside Drive around below 110th, somewhere around 105th, 106th. I met them because I was very interested in Greece, but it was, and of course, the time period, it was wonderful. And people then said you should have seen it earlier at Minton's when Bird was alive, when Art Tatum played it, was it the Deuces? And you could go next door, 52nd Street. All that was left was Hickory House, and it was nice to hear Joe and Marion McPartland, but it was not the same. There was a club composer. Mary Lou would play there a lot. John Mahegan, a teacher, opened for her. Billy Taylor was there. I remember going up, seeing him on Madison Avenue, way uptown 160th Street once. A good man, a wonderful voice for other people in jazz, and too easily forgotten. He may not have been an innovator, but his taste, his exquisite work, his recording of Little Girl Blue, just beautiful.
At Atlantic, that's where you met Gunther Schiller for the first time?
I thought I had met him once, but if I met him after a concert at Carnegie Recital that I went down for, I don't remember people after I play because I'm still in the world of dreams. So Gunther said he noticed me sweeping floors for Atlantic. Tom Dowd liked me personally. I learned a lot from him, but he was not impressed by my engineering skills. Dropping the little, and I served the best coffee I knew were to get takeout, and Nestle would. But again, there were times I would just be looking. I couldn't believe what I saw of the musicians coming in and out.
But
And
Gunther invited you to Lennox School, correct?
well, I auditioned for John Lewis. So I is George Schuler, Gunther's son, who has done the remarkable Lennox School of Jazz Films, a modern jazz quartet. I was there 4 years, and my parents paid the first year, and the other 3 years I was chauffeur, waiter, ticket holder, and mostly working from midnight to 8 every morning at the switchboard. So I was thrilled that Abby Lincoln called Max Roach once. I don't know what time of night, but it was. I was told never to listen to calls, so I obey rules. And the Stephanie and Philip Barber were great, and to connect with Bill Evans, who was wonderful, to meet George Russell, to get to know John Lewis. A friend of his, Arlene Cunningham, I wrote a piece for Arlene. Percy Heath was a delight. June. Dizzy Gillespie, the first year, had everybody in. Marshall Stearns was there at the beginning. He never forgave me for yawning in his class, but it really was very hard being up most of the night. Uh, so many. Oh, JJ was wonderful. I had a wonderful lesson with Max Roach, and I can't even lift up a stick or mallet, but he worked with me on the piano, and I wish I had tape recorded or kept better notes, but what an exquisite teacher. And so there's never been another Lennox.
Right.
And it's great to have it within 6 weeks so that you really, I think that's some of the best part of my teaching, where you're really right there with some students over a period of days. And so Lennox made that available. We all ate together in the dining room, and such an important place.
Right. Well, your first recording technically is at Lennox School.
Yes.
1959 at the Music Barn. I guess Kenny Durham was playing trumpet.
Oh, I left him out. What a wonderful teacher. Oh, and he insisted I play. I wasn't very good in one part with a rhythm section, but he and Ray Brown were fabulous. But Kenny, KD, he came up to Bard College with Rubina, and I wish I knew what happened to the children. But yes, I forget whether it was Vanguard I played or Silver Fox. I forget, but I know that the local newspaper mentioned it in a sentence on the bottom of a review, but the review was centered around the talent of Ornette Coleman, and he deserved every word. And of course, I can remember where Ornette Coleman sat in with the Herb Pomeroy Orchestra, a rehearsal, and John Lewis and Gunther practically fainted, Martin Williams. And to have very nice chord changing, swinging music, and Ornette come on from another world with great blues inflection, but he was from a different planet. That was more shocking than later Ornette recordings, because the background, I don't want to knock Herb, is an incredible person, and we did also duets for an MIT label, but an incredible human being and arranger, composer, leader. But to have that hot, warm bayou waters with the North Pole and sleet and ice, It's one of the most monumental experiences I've ever had. And this was right in the music barn at Lenox. Ooh,
That's amazing. That's amazing. Um, so to move on, I mean, I want just two directions I want to go in. One is um, I want you to talk a little bit about Gunther and what you learned from him. And I guess he was he the one who invited you to come to New England Conservatory?
yes, he was. And the and I did teach this starting the second year, joined the adult faculty a year or two afterwards, and we started. It was called Third Stream instead of Contemporary Improvisation. But at first, the first year, I sort of went back to my role at Atlantic delivering mail, certain magazines and I've kept a list of all the people I've met at New England Conservatory, which should be on the program. And it was incredible working with Gunther because he had a little more time to have me as a student. About from the third and fourth year on, I was lucky if I could see him twice a year. But he really he had no idea the financial state the conservatory was in, and he and Harvey Phillips and so many other people he brought in really they brought in innovations, but they kept the school alive. And Gunther, Andy Fallender, there were so many people rooting for the conservatory, and we began to turn around. So it was a very fertile period for the students to be there under Gunther.
And you ended up being the inaugural chair of the Third Stream Department, right?
Right.
In 1972. Okay. Oh. Let me go back to something else. So while all this is happening, and you're moving into NEC, but you're out there composing, recording, your first solo piano piece. And one of the things that really fascinated me personally, you mentioned Greece, is that you're connected to politics. And I know that, even before you witnessed the military coup in Greece and your detention, you were writing compositions or creating compositions that were also politically engaged, like Birmingham, USA, for example. Mm-hmm.
And what happened to those three girls? I'm going to say one thing more about my very second and third year at Conservatory. I also co-chaired and occasionally just worked for the community services, and we had one of the most inspiring ladies in New England, Kay Nurse, formulating her ideas, sending music to prison, to retired citizens' communities. Greece was a dream. I had loved the movie Zorba the Greek. Jean and I were making our second trip to Europe. We made a little bit of profit. She said, "Ran, use this as sort of a doggy bag. Don't squander and go to Greece." I said, "I really wanted to meet Mikis Theodorakis." I've recorded a lot of versions of his piece Vradiazi, and there was a agency called PIA, and the owner of it was a remarkable lady who spoke Greek and French, but I was able to gather that I would be hired for 3 or 4 concerts for just $200 or $300, but that was still not bad money in the time, and it would pay for my study and just getting a room at a boarding house or anything. And my third or fourth day there, April 20th, 1967, I saw troops and soldiers walking on the street, but I thought nothing of it. And the next morning, I was at a little hotel with a very kind Greek couple, And of course, like most Americans, I don't learn a foreign language. They were trying to, I started to go out to get the uh, Herald Tribune for people who don't read languages or understand, and the door was blocked, and they said no. And I thought, gee, what had I done? I know that I followed visual art then, and I met one person, a self confessed communist. And then I went to a lady, and it turned out she was married to Prince Michel. So royalty, and was I bringing information from one to another? Then that thought went out of my head. I felt it was bigger than me. And then we went to a window, and I don't think we saw the clock or anything, but we saw people moving, and there seemed to be a lot of agitation. I think we saw soldiers and armbands. I can't swear that. And later they walked me to a newsstand, and a London paper said there had been a military coup. And I gather one had been planned for 3 weeks later by generals, but this was by the colonels. And it took even the conservative population really by surprise. I think there was going to be upcoming election, and people were afraid of communism. And all this I understood better after leaving Greece a week later and doing a concert in Oslo and Rome, publicizing this. But really, when asked verbally, I didn't know what I was talking about. I didn't know about Margaret Papandreou, Andreas Papandreou, the whole the history of the presidents, and I really woke up quickly on that trip. It
Wow.
really, and it's haunted me ever since.
Well, I'm not sure if this is related, although it was interesting that that was your birthday, right? April 20th.
Yes, and the history books will say April 21st, but I felt that thing on that night. Later, I heard about Phalanga, which I think I recorded, a Greek torture where people have bare feet put on uprooted nails that have been put on fire. Now, I understand that Greece did not invent this torture, but I had no idea about torture.
Hmm, that's amazing. I mean, what I thought was really striking was, 2 years later, you go into the studio and you record The Blue Potato and Other Outrages, which has songs like, the the three seeds movements, Bridges to Braid, Che Guevara, Malcolm X. You record Max Roach's Garvey's Ghost. You record Fables of Faubus. It's an extraordinary record. So can you talk about your decision to make that and your decision to choose those compositions and to write some of your own?
Well, that was to be, I had done a ESP solo record, but Mate Edie, who met me at this historic session where Abby Lincoln sang Blue Monk, and where Monk was, I've never seen Monk so amazed. So a guy came up and we said, "Isn't it wonderful, Abby and Monk?" And hearing the whole band with a Booker on trumpet, and Mal, everybody. And he said, "I'd like to record you, and but it may take me a year or two before I can." So it took about 6 years, because I think that session, you remember it better. That was 61, did you say, or 60? That's when I met. No, that was Freedom Now Suite. That's 58, 59. And the Straight Ahead, I was already working in New York.
Right. Yeah. So Straight Ahead was February 61.
Yeah. So already Abby, Max, and Mal had gotten right into me. And Mate and I would occasionally meet. He had a neighbor called Joe Maneri who did microtonal clarinet, who became a hit teacher at the conservatory. So there were we just thought of things. He was going to, except for really most of the albums, I chose the repertoire with my partner. Um, Gene has always regretted Season in the Sun, but Georges Duvivier made it swing. Bless him. So I just felt, here I am in Boston. I'm deprived of New York. Everything in Boston closes up at 11 or 12. I had no idea there were after night clubs. By then I'm a little bit older. I used to have the key to the conservatory to Gunther's office. I would go there at nights, and I couldn't get Greece out of my mind. And Alabama was so terrible, but I witnessed things in Greece, not just on screen. And everything like God Bless the Child, Two Stars Fell in Alabama has a story instead of girl meets boy romance. Afro-American meets maybe somebody from Appalachia. Maybe they will fuse together, but there's a separation at the beginning. And you're right, the Three Seeds and Friday Ozzy Never on Sunday, which was a pop hit 5 years earlier. But I put it in 3/4. So there's a story in every number. And then after that album, I didn't really record for a while until Breakthrough. And people in Europe encouraged me. But I've never forgotten those experiences. I've never forgotten Jean Lee hearing about Alabama on an airplane and her breaking into tears and the stewardess saying, "What's wrong?" And then I guess the word got out and everybody understood. Just terrible events. And we're not through with them yet. January 6th. But we could move on that.
Right. No. I've always, one of the things I love about your music is how you're able, especially in settings like solo, duo, these really intimate musical settings, you've been able to absorb and personalize the moment, the global moment, the national moment. There's ways that you do that. And I was always wondered how your choice of both as a composer and a player to perform so frequently as a soloist in duo settings. Certainly you have ensemble pieces, and you certainly write for quartets and orchestras and things like that. But you tend to go toward the kind of solo. And also, I realize in terms of your recording, you've only you don't usually have a bass player.
They don't like me because I keep changing the root of the chord. But I have since then, I've had a wonderful bass student, and I remember Richard Davis coming to the apartment that I was a boarder in once, bringing the bass from playing with him. I wish it had happened more often, but he really made the effort to come. But I think just the whole thing of a rhythm section, I'm just so impressed by McCoy and even some pianists I admire less that just can lock in. And I don't think they have my memories. And Dave Brubeck heard me in Lenox with a group. He says, "Ran, it's good you're doing this, but it doesn't sound like you." And so I feel Christine Correa, Dominique Eade, Sarah Serpa, Ricky Ford, David Knife, the Fabris, and so many others, John Azila, Andrew Rathbun, Daryl Lowry, so many people have opened themselves up. And really coordinated a lot of the stuff. So I've loved that contact. But with a larger group, actually, I think the quartet is the most challenging because if a larger group is doing something, if they do a little stream of consciousness and there's a laid out arrangement, I feel there's a plan. And the quartet is really, I know that John Azila, the drummer, we once lived in Gunther Schuder's house taking care of the garden on one summer with 2 or 3 other people. And by playing with them nightly, I learned more about rhythm and the use of silence. But I don't know. There's so much, Robin, to keep learning in life. I've got so much work.
Well, we all learn from you, I have to say. Speaking of learning, I wanted to have you talk a little bit about your educational philosophy, um, and how it evolved over time, and the result, of course, is your landmark book, Primacy of the Ear. So can you talk about that?
Well, I think it's not that popular by students. I think so many people are grown on written music. Um, I've tried to, it's centered a little on jazz, but I've tried to include Shostakovich, uh, Italian opera overture, Chopin, Edith Piaf, as well as, of course, in the more jazz tradition, featuring many singers like Al Green, Chris Connor, Abbey Lincoln, of course, Billie Holiday, Stevie. Uh, I think that does get through often as the semester begins to close. And then it's so easy for me to say, are you getting to know musicians that are older than you? Now, artists, Herbie Hancock could fill an auditorium. Monk would in the 60s, but Monk might not have in the early 50s. They don't have access. I want them to tell their story. And maybe their story is a family problem. Some of these are young students that come. I would hope as a senior citizen I would have more experience. So it presents a challenge, but my philosophy is to hear the music and really get to feel it for a few days before and don't even think of memory. Then starting with the melody. On the other hand, a guitar player might hear chords better. And then I don't emphasize this enough now in classes to really encourage people to tell a story so they're less self conscious when they're playing. Chords, though, are challenging. We all know about 251, and many people know about extensions. But what about a chord like this and then a chord like that? But when you play them both together, that's off the beaten track. And I felt this would be more universal to folk and classical students in the class. And it really has been. And I am so thrilled that progress is being made, but it's again a challenge. I've had the most wonderful relationship with Hank Snetsky, who joined the department in the mid-late 70s, and of course Ken Shatworth in jazz department, Eden Adam Summer, and so great to see Jason Danilo Perez. I'm leaving out such wonderful faculty, and of course Gunther, his 10 years there. But so I really don't think I had a flaw. I didn't know how to describe what I was going to do until about the early 80s. I didn't know my system of learning. And I know that, like these isolating triads, finding how to form 88, and I won't get into the technical detail. That's now how I learn music. But I realize that some students want linear, well defined, muscle pronounced work that's very specific. So I give that, and a lot of people do well by the music they've heard in their youth, so that they are used of dissonant clashes, and some people maybe less so. And maybe before I was 5, I had terrible, I didn't know anything but maybe Grieg and Rachmaninoff. And of course, both are fine composers, but they stayed within a key.
Right. Well, you've always had such open ears. I have an email from you telling me that you were listening to Straight Outta Compton. I remember that.
Oh my God.
NWA. Yeah, no, I have it. It's like, and so
Oh,
people are surprised. I, I said, I'm not surprised. Um, I want to just one final question to close out here,
sure.
which is just really about how your music has evolved over time. You know, just looking at your rep, your recordings and your performances, there was a period where you were doing a lot of conducting and writing pieces not for piano, sometimes solo instrument pieces, but not for piano, as well as ensemble pieces. And then, you know, of course, you never left piano, but you continue to do these beautiful duet works and return to some of your real classic compositions. How do you see your work evolving, like since like the 1980s and 90s up until now?
If only Martin Williams were alive now, but you and Hankus are. I wonder. I do want to say that my conducting was just put it here. Usually people like Daryl Lowry, Pat Hollenbeck, Hankus that is a conductor. So when we say conducting, it's very figuratively speech. I don't know. I tell you, I really am so enthralled by people like Al Green Mahalia and some of Gunther's work and Ulysses K. There's so many people that I really rather, I think maybe each album has some type of a plot. There are a couple of albums that don't, but like Driftwood, which I think is my best solo album, it's sort of a drifting like a piece of log down a stream. Maybe there's Mahalia, maybe there's Chris Connor from South New Jersey, maybe Abby's there, uh, maybe it's somebody else. And uh, I know that Frank Sinatra was one of the first people to have what you call concept records, Wee Small Hours, and there are probably so many others that I'm overlooking. I know the melancholy that came in Billie Holiday's life during Alderson, that really pervaded her Decca stuff. Anyway, I have a lot more to say about it, but I don't want to, Robin, do another too long a monologue. I think I would love you to tell me if I've changed.
Changed, evolved. You know, it's so hard. Those are all complicated and limiting words. You know, I can, you know, I was listening to Northern Noir, for example, and how that for me, that recording with Andrew Rathbun, I think,
He's wonderful.
yeah, it's beautiful, and in some ways it encapsulates so much of your life. I mean, you have, you know, of course, Dr. Mabuse and Strange Fruit, but you also have Panonica and, you know, Laura, which, you know, the you and you and Jean's version of Laura is unlike anything I've ever heard. Streetcar Named Desire, it's Midnight Sun, which is one of the great melodies.
Lionel Hampton to me.
Yeah. So it seems like to put it simply, you're always moving forward, but taking everything with you, always. Never leaving anything behind, but always juggling it in a way where everything is so fresh and new, and always ahead of its time, So that's how I hear you. And so what's next?
Well, we don't know what's next. I think Aaron has plans for me to keep on some productions, and we're going to center. I'm thinking right now of Cole Porter than Stevie Wonder doing a centered production. I thought that would be a great contrast, although they're probably unity. And of course, we'll be looking for some of your thoughts on Earl Gardner and his work on the ear and the world of Robin Kelley. You and Brian Priestley on Mingus, you've written one of the 2 or 3 great definitive biographies in music, and just you keep on too.
Well, I appreciate that. I tell you, I couldn't have done it without you, because your insights into Monk, both as a musician, composer, but also your stories, about which we haven't really talked about, but I figured people know those stories, were so astounding and so intimate. It got me inside of Monk's family in a way that almost no one besides a family member has been able to do. So,
and I still don't know how you heard of me. You may have heard of me, but how you knew I knew Monk, I don't think it, but you can keep that secret and tell me another time. But it was such a revelation being there, and such wonderful chance to get to know you through the years. And I just wish we lived closer together.
Yes, I do too. I could tell you that the answer to that question is very simple, is that everyone in the Monk family loves you. Your family.
I love them.
TS was like, you need to talk to Rand. You need to talk to Rand. Don't do this book without talking to Rand. So of course.
And he was wonderful. He loved to go down my banister of my landlady, and Boo Boo Barbara was terrific, and Nellie, her frozen juice, and wanting to have people eat more vegetables. But Barbara loved a variety of food that may not, but all these memories, what a wonderful family they were.
Yes, well, you're a part of that. So anyway, thank you, Rand, for this
Rob.
time. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Rob.
So Aaron, thank you.
Yes, we couldn't have done it without Aaron.
Hey, thanks so much. Really appreciate your time.
So, Robin, see you soon. Bye-bye.